This is the ultimate camera comparison video of Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra versus iPhone 15 Pro Max. After all the updates, which is the better phone? Let the battle begin. Today we're comparing the flagship iPhone 15 Pro Max and Samsung Galaxy S24 since we now have the new Pixel 9 and Pixel 9 Pro and the upcoming iPhone 16 series. In a few weeks, I think it's high time for us to revisit the flagship competition of Samsung and iPhone to see how they stack up today with all the updates in. We are shooting both phones in auto mode out of the box. We're shooting both indoors and outdoors. We're shooting sky, flowers, and random colorful things. We're also utilizing the quad camera setup of Galaxy S24 and the triple camera system of iPhone 15 Pro Max. We are starting this comparison with color profile and saturation, and Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra after all the updates, I feel still retains the natural looking colors. Comparing with iPhone 15 Pro Max, it is less saturated than the competition. It has a cooler white balance compared to the competition, and you will see that it smoothens the surface, or I should say that the colors are blending in, depending on what colors dominate the subject. You will see this on the flowers and the floors. And like any other Samsung phone, it has a high dynamic range look. You will see that it exposes the shadows and the subject better. Obviously, if some of the areas are against the light, Galaxy S24 Ultra will try to expose them. A lot of time it works, but some of them looks really cheap that feels like coming from a smartphone. It manages the highlights better. You can still see some information on the bright light source, and it also has a bluer sky compared to iPhone 15 Pro Max. Samsung is cranking the colors of the sky a little bit. What I love about Galaxy S24 Ultra is the extra 3x optical zoom that you will not find on iPhone 15 Pro Max, but they both have the same 5x optical zoom, and you also have the space zoom on the latest Samsung flagship. While iPhone 15 Pro Max after a year of updates still retains the tendency of a more colorful and more saturated look than Samsung, you can see this on the pink, the greens, and the reds. It crushes the shadows and the blacks, giving a stronger contrast look than the competition. Personally, I like this better just because it gives a little bit of depth to the image. Sometimes it backfires on a situation wherein you wanted to see a brighter image, but the photos coming from iPhone 15 Pro Max doesn't look cheap. It also feels like it's coming from a proper camera. It doesn't blend the colors on the surface. You can see individual colors on the subject and the surface, unlike S24 Ultra, which I feel makes more sense. And definitely you would see more details on the surface like the teddy bears and the flowers. It doesn't look as beautiful as Samsung competition, but for non-portrait shots, the images looks better. And like Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra, there's no over-sharpening on iPhone 15 Pro Max. Again, both phones looks really natural. And looking at all sensors, you got ultra-wide main sensor and 3x optical zoom on Galaxy S24 Ultra. And they both have 5x optical zoom. And zooming into the farthest, you will have better reach on Galaxy S24 Ultra. This is Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra using the selfie camera in 4K 60fps. Outside this camera comparison video, what I like about this phone is the screen. I like the boxy shape of it and also the S Pen that's unique for the S24 Ultra. This is the 8K video recording on Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. There's no 8K video recording on iPhone 15 Pro Max. And this is the dual video recording on S24 Ultra, unique for Samsung phones. There's no feature like this on iPhone 15 Pro Max. Let's talk about portrait mode, and both phones are really good in terms of portrait shots. I mean, you can't go wrong with any of these two phones. If you're paying this much for a flagship phone, I bet you will get the best results out of these smartphones. Let's start with the similarities on both phones. I think both of them has great subject separation or cutout on one of the shots where you have a busy background with the grass. You would see that iPhone 15 Pro Max has better cutout compared to Galaxy S24 Ultra, but the Samsung competition is not so bad. Galaxy S24 Ultra smooth skin effect by default. You would see that even though there's information on the face, it's much smoother than the competition. You would also notice natural looking skin tone but a little bit pinkish kind of look for both me and my wife. The exposure is a little bit darker on Galaxy S24 Ultra, and the colors overall are natural looking and has a neutral tone. What I like about this phone is the 3x optical zoom, also a portrait shot. So this is more like 60 to 75mm shot, and the iPhone 15 Pro Max doesn't have it. While the Apple's top of the line has a warmer white balance than Samsung, I would say it's more inviting than S24 Ultra. Also, the exposure is a little bit brighter on this phone. There's certainly more details on our faces, and you would see more freckles on my wife's face than Galaxy S24 Ultra, and you would also see that the contrast is a little bit stronger than the competition. It crushes the darker areas like my eyes and the hair, so the subject pops out a little bit. Both phones are also capable of night portrait mode, and both phones are doing exceptional job on this. I feel like with more details on Galaxy S24 Ultra, it is brighter, and iPhone 15 Pro Max retained the tendencies to be warmer. Going for the selfie camera, I think you have wider FOV on Galaxy S24 Ultra, and you would notice that the colors on Samsung is a little bit better than the iPhone 15 Pro Max. It's a little bit washed out looking at the shirt. Looking at the night shots, both phones are still impeccable in terms of performance. I mean, these two phones are two of the best smartphones in terms of night shots. Right off the bat, you will notice that Samsung manages the highlights better. You can still read some of the text, and it controls the strong light source really well. It also exposes the shadows better looking at the trees and the plants. You would still see leaves on it, unlike the iPhone 15 Pro Max. The overall look on Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra is toned down. It's a little bit darker than the competition and even the sky. Moving to the iPhone 15 Pro Max, you would notice it's brighter than the competition. It is more saturated. You can see this on the greens and the reds. And overall, you will notice that iPhone 15 Pro Max has better exposure than the Samsung flagship. I guess the biggest difference here is the pitch black condition, where you would notice a solid performance on iPhone 15 Pro Max. It will still emit a little bit of information on the sensors, while it's totally gone on Galaxy S24 Ultra. This is iPhone 15 Pro Max in 4K 30fps using the selfie camera. What I like about this phone is the iOS and the iMessage. Obviously, iPhone is the only phone that has iOS, and also I like the video recording of this phone. I think it's a little bit better than Samsung phone. If we check who manages the highlights better, if we zoom in on a couple of shots, you will notice that Galaxy S24 Ultra showed more information and it's not blown out. Talking about close focus or macro, only iPhone 15 Pro Max offers macro shot. You can also use the ultra wide lens of S24 Ultra, but it's not as close as the iPhone. Also, if you use the 5x optical zoom, you would notice that iPhone 15 Pro Max still has the closer focus. Checking who manages the noise better without the HDR or night shot, you would notice that iPhone 15 Pro Max has better exposure and noise reduction than Galaxy S24 Ultra. In terms of sharpness, using the ultra-wide lens, it's almost the same. Samsung only cleans up the image. Going to the main sensor, if you zoom in, both phones has the same level of sharpness, but only Galaxy S24 Ultra has 3x optical zoom that is better compared to the digital crop. And going to the farthest zoom, both of them has 5x optical zoom, but only S24 Ultra has 100x space zoom. And lastly, details. If you compare the 12 megapixel JPEG, both of them has the same level of details on the main sensor, but you can also use the 200 megapixel readout of S24 Ultra. It's so much vivid than the competition, but it's also soft and blown out. This is the zoom test of Galaxy S24 Ultra and iPhone 15 Pro Max. And this is the main sensor. I think almost the same quality. Just a little bit warmer on S24 Ultra. But maybe it's just the screen. This is the 3x optical zoom on S24 Ultra. And you have the 2x on iPhone 15 Pro Max. Then both have the 5x. But only S24 Ultra has 10x. This is the stabilization test, starting with the ultra-wide sensor in 4K 30fps, and Galaxy S24 Ultra has better stabilization. You can even feel my every steps on iPhone 15 Pro Max. And this is the main sensor again in 4K 30fps, and still S24 Ultra has better stabilization. iPhone 15 Pro Max weighs a little bit bigger. And this is the 5x optical zoom on both phones, and again, S24 Ultra has better stabilization and focus. iPhone 15 Pro Max is a little bit jerky. Going for the selfie video recording in 4K 30fps, I think in terms of stabilization, they're both the same. iPhone 15 Pro Max only has the wider field of view. And this is the slow motion test, and obviously the biggest difference between the two, Galaxy S24 Ultra can shoot up to 4K at 120 FPS. I know a place where you can go. And this is the low light video recording, and we're shooting on all sensors. You would notice that Galaxy S24 is keeping some of the frames while we're changing from one sensor to another. It's also a little bit darker on the 5x optical zoom. But going back to the main sensor, I think it's almost the same look on both phones. I think overall, iPhone 15 Pro Max is a really good smartphone overall from the image to video. I can see any flaw on this phone, and I also feel that the audio on this phone is a little bit better than Galaxy S24 Ultra, so it's really good for vlogging. Well, I can say the same thing on Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. The image quality is really good as the iPhone 15 Pro Max. And going to the video recording, you got better stabilization, you got 8K video recording and 4K slow motion. And I feel like in terms of features and performance, you'll get more out of S24 Ultra.